We just talked about Azure Sentinel, and we kind of saw a preview of Defender for Cloud in that video. We're probably going to go over the same content again here, but we're pivoting to Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The exam objective for Defender for Cloud is pretty straightforward. It's just one item on the study guide, and that's identify and remediate security issues for virtual machines, on-prem and Azure IaaS ones. There isn't much more on the study guide to go off of, but I wanted to make a specific video to talk about Defender for Cloud to give an overview of it. I don't know how much you need to understand, but it does have a lot of tools packed into one portal, so I thought I'd just kind of touch on the different tools that are available. And then once we've gone over those, I'll try to talk about what I think the exam objective is getting to, just so you know. And the exam objective itself, it seems like it's pretty focused in one specific area. That seems pretty straightforward. So the overview will probably take up most of our time, and then we'll probably revisit Defender for Cloud for virtual machines, probably doing the same thing we did in the last video, which is just looking at issues and remediating them. So with that in mind, let's cut over quick to our Azure portal here. Give me 1 second to pull up information. There we go. Okay. So Defender for Cloud, unlike Windows Defender portal from the server product thing, which is its own admin center, and unlike the Entra admin center, Defender for Cloud is a portal that's built into the rest of your Azure environment. And forgive me for the sunlight that's on my hands. I feel like I'm glowing a little bit here. But we get to it just by going to Azure and then typing in Defender for Cloud. And you see it listed there. It's also, there's like 1,000 different things in Azure that all point back to Defender for Cloud. I think as they've chosen that as their central platform for security. So you might even see things like security and security baselines. And as you get into this, most of the things here end up pointing back to Defender for Cloud in some way, shape, or form. So if I go to Security Center, visit Defender for Cloud to manage security settings. So you might see references to Defender for Cloud all over the portal, and really that's because I think they're consolidating things into that. So if we go to this portal, sign in here, you'll see a pretty good overview as soon as you launch the page. Actually, let's go to the getting started thing so we can see. It has installing agents. All right. So as I mentioned, Defender for Cloud is kind of a consolidation of a number of different security products. It works closely with Sentinel, where Sentinel is your SIEM and SOAR product, but this is kind of the back end thing that's used to monitor some of the more cloud-focused resources. So it is focused on like DevSecOps, meaning implementing security into your DevOps practices. It is considered, I really hate these security acronyms, CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management Solution. So it's kind of trying to give you an overview of where you're actually at from a cloud security standpoint. And the reason that those tools have become more and more prevalent nowadays is because the scope of cloud resources has grown so much that oftentimes you need a special tool like Defender for Cloud to give you kind of a high level overview of all the different security areas that are available in your Azure tenant. If you ever work with Microsoft to do security assessments for Azure, every single assessment is going to come back to this portal and start at this portal as far as looking at reports. So it's good to be aware of it because that's where they look. That's also where you should be looking if you're trying to get a grasp of where your security posture is overall in your Azure platform. What's nice about this, and you can see this listed here, this is integrated with Azure and has reports and some default stuff that we'll go over for Azure specifically, but it also integrates with AWS and GCP and other cloud providers. I don't know what that integration looks like or how well those tools work, but it's there and it's kind of baked into some element of the platform itself. As we look at this, let's see if I can get back to the page that I was getting at. Yeah, this is it. This is the right page. So by default, give me 1 second. I'm going to pause and fix this light thing because it's driving me nuts. All right, back. this page kind of gives you an overview of what Cloud Defender is in a nutshell. And as an effort to consolidate all the different security products, Microsoft itself doesn't bundle everything that's available into one license that you can then apply globally. It goes with the cloud model where you have different types of licenses you can apply to protect different types of resources that are all billed on a regular occurrence. I'm going to hide my camera here for a second to show you this menu over here. So you've got agents you can deploy into the different subscriptions, and you can use those agents to enable, by default, Defender for Cloud plans on different resources, and you'll see an example of the plans they've got over here. So you've got $5 per billable resource per month for CSPM resources. You can pay for the license for servers. You can pay to protect Azure SQL databases, storage accounts. You can see there's a cost per resource that you want to manage and protect with Defender licenses. And in order to get some of the more advanced security features, you have to come in and enable the license and start paying for them. I wanted to call that out specifically because a lot of the security references in Microsoft will want you to pay for some of these licenses. It's not required for the AZ-801 exam, but just as part of the overview, a lot of the features of this isn't available unless you're paying for them. To click then through some of the extra stuff that you can do here, and we will see where licenses kind of apply based on what we're clicking through. Let's first start with this security posture screen here. Actually, no. Let's go up to recommendations and start there. So this recommendations page is intended by Microsoft to be a place that you can start and kind of get an idea of what are my next steps of security things that I have to configure in my Azure tenant. What might I be missing? Obviously, they give me a security score. My tenant is not all that secure, but it's mostly lab environment, so I don't actually care. And they have a list of all the different vulnerabilities that they consider to contribute to that security score, or configurations rather than vulnerabilities, and they also give you kind of an idea of how critical. Let me close my camera here again so I can kind of show you the whole thing. How critical those controls are that you should be applying. In this case, MFA is considered to be a very critical thing, and the fact that I don't have it configured, they consider that to be a pretty bad element. And you can also see the potential score increase just by doing that, by enabling these settings, and it shows what you need to do to configure this. So this is saying for like MFA, any account that has owner permissions should have MFA enabled, or with write permissions on Azure resources. So it gives you an idea of what the setting is, how much it contributes to your security score, and how critical Microsoft thinks. And this is intended to be kind of like your starting page for evaluating security in your Azure tenant and what you need to be doing, what you should be doing or thinking about. Even here, so going back to our objective of managing IaaS VMs, it says right here, machines should be configured to periodically check for missing system updates, and it says that I'm not compliant. Now, there is a thing to wonder, and that is, what exactly is it looking for here to validate that I am not checking for regular updates? But I'll get to that in a second. So let's just click through some of these other menus. This is the recommendations tab. This is where we start with. And then I'll kind of get back to some of the ones that are more exam objective related. I'm going to go pretty quick on these because I don't think it's important for you to know this for the exam, but I want you to have an idea of what the portal does, because this is really useful. So starting here with security posture, this is going to be your overall view of your security posture in your portal. Let this load, and it talks about, you've got your broken down in different subscriptions. And if I look at recommendations, actually, let me go back to this one. You'll notice this is the same page basically from the recommendations tab, where the recommendations tab went over your whole environment. This you can drill down into individual subscriptions and individual resources within those subscriptions to get the posture of those resources. So security posture is what it is, kind of a good overview. Now, if I switch to regulatory compliance, you'll see a whole bunch of these security compliance benchmarks or baselines, benchmarks that Azure checks against for you. So These tie back to different security frameworks, NIST 853, SOC 2, different compliance things. It's not, I don't know if you can choose what benchmark you want to compare against, but essentially it's populating this list of different categories of security that it's checking, and then where your resources meet or fail those checks and compliances. Now, I pulled this up specifically because this is kind of a default thing that it's good to be aware of if you're in the Azure tenant. It ties back to Azure Policy, which I'm going to be doing a separate set of lessons on because Azure Policy is so important. But you'll notice if I expand these categories, it talks about different controls you should have in place. And this one, secure cloud services with network controls, establish segmentation boundaries. If I go to data protection, monitor for anomalies and threats targeting sensitive data. So these are all the different things that it's checking for, is saying, do you meet this requirement, do you not? But the way that it checks for these is using Azure Policy, and specifically it uses the Microsoft Security Benchmark or something policy. So I go up to this button for Manage Compliance Policies. It should take me over there, I think. So interesting. This is taking me to the Defender plan. So this is actually taking me to the page that I can use to enable licenses for different products. But it's not at all to do with compliance policies. It's just environment settings. So let's nix that and see if I can find it here instead. Yeah, here we go. So this is what I thought it was going to take us to. This ASC default is Azure Security Center default. And these are a list of Azure policies that Azure Defender for Cloud is using to check and evaluate all of your resources against those regulatory compliance benchmarks that it has listed. So you'll notice monitor anomalies and threats targeting sensitive data. This is that policy we literally just looked at in the Defender for Cloud portal. So I'm not going to go into what Azure policy is or how it works right now, other than to say it's a GPO style thing for Azure. But this is where these are the policies that Azure is using to evaluate whether or not your resources meet compliance according to their regulatory compliance framework that they have outlined in there. Essentially, this is a default baseline that they apply to all subscriptions so that they can check your resources. And if you're worried about compliance in the Azure Policy Center, it gets kind of annoying because this policy is basically always going to mark you as non-compliant. Anyways, let's go back to the Defender for Cloud portal here. Workload protections is going to be a lot of the same. You need to be able to enable the licenses on subscriptions to get to this. Data security is also going to be really similar, where you have to register and configure resources to be monitored before you get some of these. So you obviously see that this is going to be a platform where the more licenses you pay for different products, the more visibility and information is going to get to you about those different workloads. A lot of these have to do with cloud-based resources and protecting those resources and controlling and monitoring how data is moving between them. These are basically all that. Firewall Manager is basically the same thing, where it talks about, do you have an Azure firewall configured and is it protecting you for different things? So this is a good central view for firewall specific things or virtual network configurations, though I've never really used it. To come back, I'm not going to pay for licenses. I'm not going to go into some of those license features that require you to be licensing, but the one other thing I'm going to call out is there's this feature they have called attack path analysis. A Microsoft security rep actually showed this to me, and it's pretty cool, but it does require you to pay per subscription. But what this product does, if you're paying for it, it will monitor every resource and evaluate how those resources talk to each other, and it tries to give you a report of potential attack paths they can use, meaning this user got access to this virtual machine, which has this user assigned identity associated with it, which also has permissions to this other resource group over here, which has owner rights, and now I can create all these resources. So it tries to do that sort of chaining evaluation and analysis to let you know what are areas that you might be vulnerable, where someone could use a number of attacks to then manipulate and get access to more resources or perform a more coordinated or aggressive attack against your environment. This is a really cool feature. Like I said, another paid feature I'm not going to pay for. that's the overview of Defender for Cloud that I'm going to get into. There's more to it, obviously, but I don't think you need to know it for the exam objectives. But to get back to the exam objectives being identify and remediate security issues for on-premise servers and Azure IaaS VMs, what I think that's referring to is mostly in this section. This section and inventory, but they're kind of tied together. Right here, you've got your, if I go to inventory tabs, you have a list of all the different resources in your Azure tenant. Specifically, the one the exam objectives is worried about is your VMs. So you've got your virtual machines listed here. This also goes back to the Azure Arc, Azure Monitoring Agent conversation where I mentioned the requirement to enable the Azure Monitor Agent on on-prem servers is that those on-prem servers have to be Arc enabled, and meaning you need to have them configured so you can manage the servers in Azure. Azure has some control or access to those servers via its own data plane, and then it ties into things. This is going to be the same concept for Defender for Cloud. If you want to protect your on-prem servers using for Defender for Cloud, they have to be Arc enabled so that they're visible here as VMs that then it can evaluate using its existing Azure tools just like it would an Azure VM. So step one for on-premise servers and services, configure Azure Arc service. Step two, view your data here to see what your vulnerabilities might be for those VMs. So if I click into one of these, I will see a list of different remediation tasks that need to be done to make this healthy. I'm going to close my cam so we can kind of look at this list. If I see this status here, it's got a number of different things here. Azure Virtual Machines should enable Azure Disk Encryption. There'll be a video about that. Machines should be configured to periodically check for missing systems updates. And you'll see my status here is healthy. So let's just filter this to, I only want to see unhealthy statuses for this VM. And I've got 5. It basically is saying the VM is not encrypted, so I should use Azure Disk Encryption or encryption at host to fix that. They should be periodically configured to check for missing systems updates. And then from a less severity, you have vulnerability assessment. You should have, this is the same thing as this. You need encryption host, and then guest configuration should, if you're using that, should be installed in machines. Now, if I click into one of these, it's interesting to me that I don't see the warning about Azure Monitor Agent here. I wonder if that's a not checked for thing. That's what we did in the Sentinel video. Either way, if I check into one of these, let's actually do the missing system updates one. It says what the related recommendation are from the recommendation page. System updates should be installed with your Azure machines powered by Azure Update Manager. So this is specifically saying the machines aren't configured to use the Azure Update Manager, so it should be configured that way. And then remediation steps, it says what you need to do to fix it if you want to do it manually. Otherwise, that comes with this fix button. Also, you can have it configured to trigger a logic app, meaning if it fails this vulnerability, I can configure an automatic action that will go fix this for me using the logic from this Defender portal. And this is where I think it's getting into the tools for identifying and remediating security issues. It wants you to look at this, see the issues that it has outlined and identified for your VMs, and then remediate them, either using this portal or the steps they outline, or some other tool to automatically trigger remediation in your environment. You can also go up here and look at the view policy definition, and this is telling you specifically the parameters on the virtual machine that Defender for Cloud is checking to evaluate whether this is compliant or not. This does require knowledge about Azure policy and how to interpret it and how to know what attributes it's checking for on the VMs, but this does give you information on exactly the setting that it's checking for compliance if you can interpret it. Obviously, this one is pretty complicated, so I'm not going to try and break this down. More to follow in our Azure policy video, though that's not really going to go into in depth. I might make a separate video series about Azure policy because it's a very complicated topic. So let's go back to this. If I want to fix this, I'm given a simple button. Fix one resource. This is going to kick off that action and go configure the VM. And it says remediation successful. And it says it's going to take several minutes after remediation to see the resources and healthy resources, but I wonder if I could cut over to the VM and see that it's configured. For the updates, the Azure update process here, that's in the properties of the VM. If I scroll down to updates, and it talks about customizing how you receive updates. So if you remember, that policy said it configures it with Azure Update Manager. So this has a link right here to go to that. I've never clicked this before. I have no idea if it's going to work, but let's go here, and it says periodic assessment. There we go. Okay, so I imagine this isn't configured. Just to be sure, let's go on this other tab to our other VM that we didn't configure and see if that's set to no. Yep, right here. Okay, so this VM is default. I haven't done anything with it, and it said periodic assessment. No, I don't want to evaluate this. We triggered that remediation from Defender for Cloud. It said it completed the update check, and what it's done is come in and set this periodic assessment for yes, check for whether I have updates using Azure Update Manager. So I believe that's the gist of what this objective is getting towards. You don't need to know everything that Defender for Cloud does. That's a separate exam. I'm sure it's covered in some of the Azure security certifications. But for the sake of remediating VMs, the important things to know are configure Azure Arc so that your machines can be managed in Azure and visible via the Azure data plane, so it can do some of these policy analysis against your virtual machines as if they were in Azure. And then 2, look at the inventory in Defender for Cloud and look at the recommendation steps it's having, or the ways that you fail, and then come up with a plan for remediating those either manually or using automation with Azure Logic apps. There's also the ability to export some of this data to Azure Sentinel, and Sentinel can then be used to trigger automation as well. So those are your steps for the objective specifically. The next topic that are coming up is BitLocker and then Azure Disk Encryption, which we saw referenced here. So those videos are going to be longer and a little more complicated, but I will see you for those.